The sun was shining high in the sky, casting a warm, golden glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood. It was one of those afternoons that felt perfect in every way, with a gentle breeze blowing through the trees and the smell of fresh-cut grass lingering in the air. On a day like this, most people were inside their homes, maybe watching television or taking a nap, but one famous face was decided to enjoy the weather outside. Keanu Reeves walked alone down the sidewalk. He didn't have a giant entourage with him, and there were no loud luxury cars waiting for him around the corner. He was dressed just like any other person enjoying a day off. He wore a simple, dark jacket that looked like it had seen better days, a pair of comfortable jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. To anyone driving by in a hurry, he probably just looked like a regular dad taking a stroll, maybe thinking about what to cook for dinner. But if you looked closely, you could see the weight of a very busy life in the way he carried his shoulders, slightly slumped as if he were carrying something heavy on his back. He loved these moments. The world knew him as a huge movie star, the guy who fought bad guys in action movies and traveled through time in sci-fi blockbusters. But in his heart, he just loved being a normal person. He loved the simple sound of his boots hitting the pavement. He loved waving at an old neighbor walking their dog. He loved not having to answer questions or pose for pictures. Today his mind was quiet. He wasn't thinking about scripts or movie sets. He was just breathing in the fresh air and letting his thoughts wander wherever they wanted to go. As he turned the corner onto a new street, the peaceful vibe of the afternoon seemed to get even stronger. This street was lined with big oak trees that provided plenty of shade. The houses were modest and well kept, with colorful flowers in the front yards. It felt like a place where time moved a little bit slower, a place where people actually knew their neighbors. Keanu stuck his hands deep into his pockets and kept walking, enjoying the rhythm of his own steps. Then, something in the distance caught his eye. About 50 yards ahead, on the edge of a driveway, there was a splash of bright color that stood out against the green grass and gray concrete. It looked a bit out of place, but in a happy, cheerful way. He slowed down his pace, squinting slightly under the brim of his cap to get a better look. As he got closer, he realized what it was. It was a small wooden table, usually used for crafts or maybe a card game, but today it was being used for something much more important. Draped over the table was a bright yellow tablecloth that flapped slightly in the wind. On top of the cloth there was a row of small plastic cups, all perfectly lined up next to a large plastic pitcher filled with a yellow liquid. There was also a small jar for money and a handwritten sign that was drawn with markers in bright, childish colors. Keanu couldn't help but smile a little to himself. It was a lemonade stand. Seeing something so simple and innocent really warmed his heart. It reminded him of a time when life was easy, when the biggest worry in the world was whether you would sell enough cups to buy a new toy. It was a classic symbol of childhood and summer. He stopped walking for a moment and just watched from a distance. He didn't want to interrupt or scare the young entrepreneur. Sitting behind the table on a small wooden chair was a little girl. She looked to be maybe 7 or 8 years old. She had messy pigtails and wore a t-shirt with a cartoon character on it. She didn't look bored, even though there didn't seem to be many customers coming by. In fact, she looked very serious. She was busy arranging the cups, making sure they were in a perfectly straight line, and then checking the sign to make sure it wasn't blowing away. The actor stood there, feeling a sense of admiration for her. Here she was, putting in the work, being patient, and running her own little business with total dedication. It was cute, but it was also inspiring. He realized he was the only one on the street right now, and if he didn't buy a cup, she might be sitting there for a long time waiting for the next person to walk by. He took a deep breath and started walking again, this time heading straight for the colorful setup. He could see the girl look up as his shadow fell across the driveway. At first, she just looked at him like he was just a stranger walking down the street. But as he got closer and pulled his cap up slightly so she could see his face, he saw her eyes go wide with surprise. She didn't say anything yet, but he could see the recognition flash in her eyes. She knew exactly who he was. Keanu gave her a gentle nod and a soft smile, trying to show her that he was friendly and that he had stopped on purpose. He felt a connection to this scene. It wasn't about the lemonade. It was about the human connection, the kindness of strangers, and the simple joy of seeing a kid with a dream. As he stepped onto the driveway, he felt the heaviness of his busy life lift just a little bit, replaced by the curiosity and innocence of the moment. He was ready to buy some lemonade, but he had no idea that this simple purchase was about to turn into something much deeper than he ever expected. Keanu stepped off the edge of the sidewalk and onto the smooth concrete of the driveway, moving slowly so he wouldn't startle the young girl. As he got closer, the reality of the situation seemed to sink in for her. She froze, her hand hovering over a plastic cup, and her eyes grew round as saucers. It was a look of pure disbelief, as if a character from her favorite fairy tale had suddenly walked out of a storybook and into her front yard. Most people, when they saw him, would immediately gasp, shout his name, or frantically dig into their pockets for a phone to snap a picture. The air around him usually filled with a nervous energy, a kind of buzzing excitement that was hard to ignore. But this little girl was different. She didn't scream. She didn't run inside to tell her parents. She just sat there, stunned into a silence that was actually quite peaceful. She looked at him with a mix of shyness and wonder, treating him like a rare, beautiful bird that might fly away if she made a sudden move. Keanu appreciated that more than he could say. He gave her a soft, reassuring smile, the kind that reached his eyes and made them crinkle slightly at the corners. He didn't want her to feel nervous. He wanted her to feel comfortable. He stopped on the other side of the small table, leaving a respectful distance between them. Standing there in his worn-out jacket and scuffed boots, he didn't look like a superstar who owned mansions and drove fast cars. He looked like a kind neighbor who had stopped by to see how business was going. "Hi there," he said gently. His voice was low and calm, carrying easily across the short distance. "How is business today?" The girl blinked a few times, as if waking up from a dream, and then a bright smile spread across her face. It was the kind of smile that only children seem to have, full of teeth and absolutely no worries. It's good," she stammered a little, her voice high and sweet. "I just started, though." "Well, that is exciting," Keanu replied, nodding his head as if she had just told him a very important secret. "I think I'm in luck. I am very thirsty. Could I please buy a cup of lemonade?" he asked with total politeness, using his manners just like his mother had taught him all those years ago. He wasn't acting like a celebrity doing a favor for a kid. He was acting like a customer who respected the person running the shop. The girl straightened up in her chair, looking very proud to be asked. "Yes. 1 cup coming right up," she said. Trying to sound professional, she reached out with both hands to grab a plastic cup from the stack. Her movements were careful and deliberate. Keanu watched her closely. He noticed how she tried so hard to do everything right. She wasn't just pouring a drink. She was performing a job. She lifted the large plastic pitcher with both hands. It was a bit heavy for her, but she managed it well. She tilted it carefully and a stream of yellow liquid poured out. The sound of the lemonade hitting the bottom of the empty cup was a refreshing, crisp noise that seemed to fit the afternoon perfectly. Ice cubes clinked softly against the plastic. She filled the cup about 3/4 full, just the right amount so it wouldn't spill, and then she set it down carefully on a napkin in front of him. She looked up at him, beaming, clearly proud of her work. "Here you go," she said. "Thank you very much," Keanu said. He picked up the cup. The plastic was cold against his fingers, and little droplets of water from the condensation were already forming on the outside. He took a small sip. It was sweet, maybe a little too sweet, and tangy, but it tasted like summer and happiness. It was perfect. "This is delicious," he told her honestly. "You make really good lemonade." She glowed at the compliment, her cheeks turning a little pink. Keanu reached his hand into his jacket pocket. He dug around for a moment and pulled out his wallet. It wasn't a fancy leather wallet, just a simple one that held his cards and some cash. He opened it and looked inside. He saw a $5 bill. He could have given her a single dollar or even just the loose change from his pocket, but looking at this girl and her hard work, a $5 bill felt like the right amount. It wasn't about the money. It was about valuing her effort. He pulled out the crumpled bill. It was soft from being in his pocket for a while. He held it out toward her. Here you go. The girl looked at the money and her eyes went wide again. Oh, but it's only 50 cents, she said quickly. She was already reaching for the small jar of coins to give him back his change. She was an honest business owner. Keanu shook his head and pushed the bill closer to her. No, keep the change, he said softly. You earned it. Your lemonade is the best I've had in a long time. She hesitated for a second, looking at him to make sure he was serious. When she saw the sincerity in his eyes, she nodded. She took the $5 bill from his hand and carefully placed it into her money jar. It was a big moment for her. For Keanu, $5 was a cup of coffee. But for her, it was a major sale, a huge victory for her small business. You know, Keanu said, leaning in slightly, resting his arms on the table as if they were two friends having a chat. Running a stand is hard work. You have to sit here in the sun, pour the drinks, and talk to strangers. You are doing a great job. He spoke to her with total respect. He didn't talk down to her or use a baby voice. He treated her like an equal. This meant the world to her. Adults usually told kids what to do or patted them on the head and walked away. But here was this man, famous and busy, stopping to tell her that she mattered. The girl looked down at her hands, then back up at him. There was a softness in her expression now. The initial excitement of seeing a movie star was fading away, replaced by a deeper connection. She realized that he wasn't just there because he was famous and she was lucky. He was there because he was kind. For Keanu, these simple moments were the ones that mattered most. He spent so much of his life pretending to be other people, living in fake worlds on movie sets. But this, the cold cup of lemonade, the sound of the wind in the trees, the honest smile of a child, this was real. This was what life was actually about. He felt a sense of peace standing there that he rarely felt anywhere else. He took another sip of the lemonade and looked around the quiet street. It's a beautiful day for it, he said, his voice quiet. The girl nodded. Yes, I like sitting here. I like watching the cars go by. Me too, Keanu said. It's nice to just stop sometimes. They stood there in a comfortable silence for a moment. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was the kind of quiet that happens when two people are enjoying the same moment. There was no pressure to talk, no need for entertainment. Just a man and a girl sharing a glass of lemonade on a sunny afternoon. It was a transaction, sure, but it felt like so much more. It felt like an exchange of kindness, a small ripple of goodness in the middle of a very busy world. The silence between them was comfortable, like an old, familiar blanket, but the little girl wasn't done yet. She had something on her mind, something important that she needed to say. She watched him take another sip of the lemonade, her eyes studying his face with an intensity that was surprising for someone so young. She wasn't looking at the movie star. She was looking past the fame, trying to read the story written in his features. Keanu noticed her staring and lowered the cup slightly, ready to say his goodbyes and let her get back to her business. He assumed the magical moment was over. He figured she would go back to waiting for the next customer, or maybe run inside to tell her friends that the guy from the action movies had just bought a drink. But as he turned slightly to leave, she spoke up. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the afternoon air clearly. You know, she started, leaning her elbows on the table and resting her chin in her small hands. My mom told me about you. Keanu stopped. He turned back to face her, raising an eyebrow curiously. Oh, she did? He asked. What did she say? Usually when people mentioned their parents knowing about him, it was because they loved his movies. They would talk about how cool his fight scenes were or how funny he was in comedies. He was used to being the source of entertainment, the guy who made people jump or laugh. He braced himself to hear about which movie was their favorite. The girl nodded slowly. Yes, she said you are a movie star and everyone knows your name. But she also said that you have had a very, very hard life. The words hung in the air, unexpected and heavy. Keanu felt his breath catch in his throat just a little. The smile on his face didn't disappear, but it changed. It became softer, less about being polite and more about hiding a sudden rush of emotion. He wasn't used to strangers, especially children, bringing up his pain so openly and so gently. Most of the world saw the glitz and the glamour. They saw the red carpets and the fancy premieres. Very few people took a moment to think about the losses he had suffered, the heartbreaks that had shaped him in the quiet moments when the cameras were off. "I think everyone has hard times sometimes," Keanu replied quietly. He tried to keep his voice steady. He didn't want to make the conversation too heavy for a child, but he also didn't want to dismiss her kindness. "I know," the girl agreed seriously, "but I saw pictures of you on the internet. You look sad. Not like crying sad, but lonely sad. Like you were carrying a big rock in your backpack." She used her hands to describe a heavy weight on her back, her face scrunching up with concentration as she tried to explain exactly what she meant. Keanu looked down at his boots for a second. It was amazing how perceptive children could be. They didn't filter their thoughts through what they thought they should say. They just said what they saw. And this little girl had seen through the act. She had seen the tiredness in his eyes that he tried to hide. He looked back at her and nodded slowly. "You're very observant," he told her. "That is a good skill to have." The girl sat up a little straighter, feeling proud that she understood him. She wasn't finished, though. She had a reason for bringing this up. She wanted him to understand why the lemonade stand was there, and why it was so important to her that he stopped. "That is why I am here," she explained, gesturing to the colorful table and the handmade sign. "I didn't just want to sell lemonade to make money to buy toys. I mean, toys are nice," she added with a quick, honest grin that made Keanu chuckle. "But mostly I wanted to make people smile. I wanted to make the day better for anyone who walked by." She looked deep into his eyes, her expression turning earnest and filled with a pure sort of love that he rarely encountered. "And when I saw you walking down the street, I hoped you would stop, because my mom says you are a good soul. She says you deserve all the happiness in the world, even if you don't have it right now." Keanu felt a lump form in his throat. He swallowed hard, trying to push it down. Hearing an adult say something nice is one thing, but hearing a child say that you deserve happiness, despite the sadness you carry, is a completely different experience. It was disarming in the best possible way. It stripped away all his defenses. "I really wanted to make you smile today," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, as if she was sharing a secret with him. "I thought, maybe if I give you a cold drink and say something nice, your backpack won't feel so heavy for a little while." Keanu stood frozen on the driveway. The traffic on the nearby street seemed to fade away into a dull hum. The only thing that mattered was this small human being in front of him, pouring her heart out to a stranger. She wasn't asking for an autograph. She wasn't asking for a selfie to show her friends. She was giving him the gift of her empathy. She was offering him a moment of peace, a chance to just be himself without any expectations. He looked at the pitcher of lemonade, then at the crumpled $5 bill in her jar, and finally back at her innocent, hopeful face. He realized that while he thought he was the one doing a good deed by buying lemonade, she was actually the one doing the good deed. She was teaching him a lesson about kindness. "You know," Keanu said, his voice sounding a little rougher than before, "I think your mom is right about you too." The girl tilted her head to the side. "About what?" "About you being a good person," Keanu said. "You have a very kind heart. Not many people would care so much about a stranger walking down the street." "You aren't just a stranger," she said simply. "You are Keanu, and everyone knows Keanu needs a hug even if they don't say it." Keanu let out a short, breathy laugh that was half a sob. It was such a simple truth, yet it hit him like a ton of bricks. The world often forgot that celebrities were just human beings who needed comfort just as much as anyone else. But this girl, sitting in her front yard with a pitcher of lemonade, hadn't forgotten. She remembered the wind blew a strand of hair across her face, and she brushed it away casually, unaware of the massive impact her words were having on him. To her, this was just a conversation. To him, it was a lifeline. He felt the heavy weight on his shoulders shift, just a little bit, loosening its grip. The darkness that sometimes followed him around seemed to retreat in the face of such blinding, uncomplicated kindness. He didn't know what to say. How do you thank someone for seeing your pain and trying to heal it with a 50-cent cup of lemonade? Words felt insufficient. He just looked at her, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears, trying to convey his gratitude through the silence. The connection between them was strong now, an invisible wire that connected a tired soul to a youthful spirit. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the lawn, but the warmth between them was growing. This wasn't just a transaction anymore. It was a moment of healing. And as he looked at the girl, waiting patiently for his response, he knew he would never forget this day for as long as he lived. The girl's words hung in the warm afternoon air, soft and powerful, like a gentle breeze that somehow manages to move a heavy rock. For a few long seconds, Keanu couldn't speak. The noise of the world, the distant cars, the rustling leaves, the humming of a lawnmower a few streets away seemed to vanish completely. There was only the silence between him and the little girl, and the echo of what she had just said, everyone knows Keanu needs a hug. He stood there, holding the plastic cup, his fingers tightening slightly around the cool surface. He looked at the girl, really looked at her, and saw nothing but pure sincerity in her eyes. There was no pity, which he often hated. Pity made him feel small and broken. But this wasn't pity. It was understanding. It was a strange, deep wisdom that lived inside a child who hadn't even been alive for a decade yet. She saw him, not as the invincible action hero who could dodge bullets and fight bad guys, but as a human being who had scars on his heart that no one could see, a lump formed in his throat, thick and hard, making it difficult to swallow. He tried to maintain his composure, to keep the famous movie star mask on, but it was useless. The mask had been cracked by her kindness. He felt a hot, sudden sting behind his eyes, a familiar warning sign that the tears were coming. He blinked rapidly, looking up at the sky for a moment, hoping the feeling would pass, hoping he could say something cool and walk away with his dignity intact, but he couldn't. The emotion was too strong. It wasn't just because she was nice to him. It was because he had spent so many years walking through life feeling like a ghost in a crowd, even when people were cheering his name. He had lost people he loved more than life itself. He had faced tragedies that turned his world gray, and for the longest time he had carried that grief alone, hiding it behind polite smiles and quiet interviews. He thought he had gotten good at hiding it. But standing in front of this small lemonade stand, he realized he wasn't hiding it from her. She had seen right through him. His chin began to tremble, just a little quiver that he couldn't control. He looked back down at the girl. She was watching him with a calm, patient look, as if she knew exactly what was happening and she was okay with it. She didn't look embarrassed or awkward that a grown man was about to cry in front of her. She just waited, holding the space for him. Finally, the dam broke. A single tear escaped from the corner of his eye and rolled down his cheek, catching the sunlight. It was a slow, heavy tear. He quickly reached up and brushed it away with the back of his hand, letting out a shaky breath that sounded like a laugh but was really just a release of pain. "You are incredibly wise," Keanu managed to whisper. His voice was thick, raspy, and barely audible. "You really are?" The girl smiled softly, a sweet, understanding smile that held no judgment. She reached across the table and handed him a paper napkin. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like she was handing him a lifeline. "It's okay to cry," she said simply. "My mom says crying is just your heart washing itself so it can be clean again." Keanu took the napkin, his hand trembling slightly. He dabbed his eyes, feeling foolish and yet incredibly liberated at the same time. He felt a weight lifting off his shoulders, the imaginary backpack she had talked about feeling just a little bit lighter. It was amazing, really. He had met world leaders, won huge awards, and had millions of fans scream his name, but none of that had ever made him feel seen like this one little girl did. He looked at her, his eyes red and watery, and let out a genuine soft chuckle. "Your mom is a very smart lady," he said. "And you are an amazing person." He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. He looked at the lemonade, then at the colorful sign, and then back at her. "You wanted to make me smile today," he said, his voice gaining a bit more strength. "And you know what? You did, you really did. Even though I'm crying, I am smiling on the inside. I haven't felt this peaceful in a long time." He meant every word. The sadness he carried was still there, of course. Sadness like that doesn't just go away because of a cup of lemonade. But the loneliness had evaporated. The feeling that no one understood had vanished. In this random driveway on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, a stranger had reminded him that he was worthy of love and kindness. She had reminded him that he didn't always have to be the strong one. "You did a good thing today," Keanu told her, leaning in closer so she would know he was serious. "Not just by selling lemonade, but by caring. You have a gift. The world needs more people like you. Don't ever lose that kindness." The girl sat up a little taller, soaking in his words. She could tell he wasn't just saying nice things to make her feel good. She could feel the truth in his voice. She reached out and gently patted his hand where it rested on the table. Her hand was small and warm, and the touch was electric. "I won't lose it," she promised him. "And if you ever walk by again, the lemonade is on the house? Because I think you need hugs more than you need to pay 50 cents. Keanu laughed then, a real hearty laugh that wiped away the remaining sadness from his face. It was a sound of pure joy. He squeezed her hand gently and then let go, picking up his lemonade again. He didn't care who saw him now. He didn't care if a neighbor drove by and stared. He felt cleansed. He felt human. "You're something else," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "Thank you, truly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you." For a moment, they just looked at each other, two souls from completely different worlds, connected by a moment of raw, beautiful honesty. The sun was beginning to lower, casting a golden light over the driveway, making the moment feel almost magical, like a scene from a movie, but better because it was real. Keanu knew he would carry this memory with him forever. Whenever he felt the darkness closing in, he would remember the little girl with the lemonade stand who saw his pain and offered him a cup of sweetness instead of sorrow. He felt lighter, ready to face the world again, not as a lonely man, but as someone who had been reminded of the goodness in humanity. The air between them felt lighter now, like a storm had passed and left the sky clear and blue. Keanu took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the fresh evening air, and for the first time in a long time, the air actually tasted sweet. He looked at the empty plastic cup in his hand, the ice cubes having melted into just a few sips of water. He swirled it around, smiling down at it, because this little cup held more than just lemonade. It held a memory he knew he would keep forever. He didn't want the conversation to end, but he also knew he couldn't stand there on the driveway forever. He had a life to get back to, even if that life was just going back to an empty house or a movie set. But he felt stronger now. He felt ready. He looked at the girl, who was watching him with a happy, satisfied look on her face. She looked like a cat that had just caught a mouse. Except her victory wasn't about catching something, it was about giving something. "So, what is next for you?" Keanu asked, leaning against the porch railing nearby, wanting to keep the normal talk going for just another minute. "Are you going to expand? Maybe open a second location down the street?" The girl giggled, the sound bubbling up like music. She shook her head, her pigtails bouncing. "No way, this is the only spot. It has the best shade. And besides, I can't be in two places at once. I'm not a magician." "That is a very smart business decision," Keanu nodded seriously, playing along with her. "Location is everything. You're going to be a big success one day, I can feel it. You have the smarts and you definitely have the charm." "I just want to make enough to buy a new bike," she admitted, shrugging her shoulders. But today was better than a bike. Today was the best day ever. Keanu felt his heart warm up again. "It was the best day for me too," he said softly. He meant it. He had won awards, traveled the world, and seen things most people only dream of. But standing here, talking to this child, felt like the biggest achievement of all. It was real. It wasn't about fame. It was about connection. "Well," he said, pushing himself off the railing and standing up straight. He adjusted his jacket and put his cap back on, pulling the brim low just a little. I should let you get back to work. You have a business to run and I have a walk to finish. The girl nodded understandingly. She didn't try to make him stay. She knew he needed to go. Okay, thank you for stopping, she said politely. No, Keanu said, shaking his head as he took a step backward. Thank you. You made today special. Don't forget that. I won't, she promised. He turned around and started walking back down the driveway toward the sidewalk. With every step he took away from the stand, he didn't feel the heaviness returning. Usually, when he left a peaceful moment, the noise of the real world would crash back in on him, the worries, the schedule, the expectations. But this time, the silence stayed with him. He felt a bubble of peace around him, protecting him from the stress of the outside world. He reached the sidewalk and stopped for a second. He turned around one last time. The little girl was still sitting there, but she wasn't looking at the road anymore. She was looking at him, with her hand raised high in the air, waving goodbye. Keanu lifted his hand and waved back. It wasn't a fancy wave for the cameras. It was a slow, deliberate wave from a friend to a friend. He gave her one last smile, a genuine one that reached his eyes. And then he turned back to the street. As he continued his walk, the neighborhood seemed to look different. The colors were brighter. The trees looked greener. He passed a man walking his dog, and instead of looking down to avoid eye contact, Keanu looked up and nodded. The man nodded back, looking surprised but happy. Keanu realized that his interaction with the girl had opened something up inside him. She had reminded him that the world was full of good people, and that made him want to be a good person to everyone else he met. He took the empty cup and tossed it into a recycling bin he passed on the corner. He didn't just throw it away. He placed it there carefully, as if it were a trophy. He didn't want to litter, not on a day this good. The sun was starting to dip lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Shadows were stretching across the lawns. It was getting close to dinner time for the families in these houses. Keanu could smell someone grilling burgers somewhere nearby. It was such a normal, everyday smell, but to him it smelled like comfort. It smelled like home. He thought about what the girl had said about sadness being like a heavy backpack. He realized she was right, but he also learned something else. He learned that sometimes you meet someone who helps you take that backpack off, even if it's just for a few minutes. And sometimes that few minutes is enough to give you the strength to put it back on and keep walking, but with a straighter back and a lighter heart. Behind him, at the little wooden table, the girl watched him until he turned the corner and disappeared out of sight. She sat there for a moment, feeling the breeze on her face. She looked at the $5 bill in her jar and felt a surge of happiness. She knew she had done something good. She hadn't just sold lemonade. She had shared kindness. And that made her feel bigger than she actually was, like she was tall enough to touch the clouds. Eventually, she turned her sign around to the closed side. She decided she was done for the day. She had achieved her goal. She hopped off her chair and gathered up her cups and pitcher, humming a happy tune to herself. She walked into her house, leaving the empty driveway quiet again. But the air still felt special. It felt like magic had happened there, even if no one else saw it. Keanu walked on, his hands in his pockets, his mind quiet and calm. He didn't know what the next movie would bring or what challenges life would throw at him next. He knew life was never perfect. But as he walked under the trees, listening to the leaves rustle, he smiled to himself. He knew that no matter how hard things got, there was a little girl out there who saw him. And because of her, he knew that everything was going to be okay. The world was a good place, full of lemonade stands and unexpected friends. And that was enough.